but there are so many African-American heroes, it's hard to decide which ones to tell you about. But I want to tell you the story of James Armistead Lafayette. He is in America's Famous Spies. That's one of the books in the series. And it's an amazing story. He was a slave of William Armistead, who was a devoted patriot to the American cause. And Lafayette, he was a friend of America, but he came to Williamsburg for the purpose of recruiting Black men to join the Patriot Army. And James was very interested, and his owner allowed him to serve, providing he would return after the war. And unlike many other slaves at the time, his owner had taught him to read and write, and he actually handled the finances of their farm. So he was a very brilliant man. Lafayette's job, which some people don't know, was to gather intelligence and report to General Washington. The only way that General Washington won a war against the most powerful and well-equipped nation was that he had better sources of intelligence. And the intelligence supplied him with the enemy's movements and their intentions. So Lafayette at once realized James' potential, that he was a very brilliant guy. And instead of enlisting him as a soldier, he enlisted James as a spy. So the British actually offered African-American colonists freedom after the war if they would join up with the British Army. So James would not be suspected as a spy. So he posed as a slave who had escaped, and he became a cheerful, willing servant to the British. He knew the roads in the area well because he lived there. He took note of the number of cannon that the British possessed and their troop positions and how many men they had available at any given time in any given place. And he waited on the tables of British officers. And in doing that, he overheard strategies and plans of attack. And nobody even tried to hide information from an escaped slave. And all this information he faithfully relayed back to Lafayette, who then relayed it to General Washington. So this is really cool. He was so instrumental in helping to win our freedom in the War of Independence, very instrumental. In August, he gave the report to Lafayette that he noticed massive numbers of British troops on the move. The British Navy was landing 10,000 soldiers in the vicinity of Yorktown. Also at this time, he reported to Lafayette that the British General Cornwallis had sent James to the American Army to spy for the British. So James was now a double spy. It's so cool. This meant that he would deliver disinformation prepared by Lafayette and Washington to Cornwallis while he was informing Lafayette of all the British movements and plans. James knew if he was caught, he would face death by the British, but he was faithfully loyal to the American cause. So the French began to arrive in Chesapeake Harbor. And with the help given by James Armistead, the French and Americans were able to trap the British by land. After 10 days of fighting, the British surrendered at Yorktown. James Armistead's loyal service as a double agent was instrumental in our achieving victory in the War of Independence. And Lafayette was instrumental after the war in helping James obtain his freedom. James was a really honest man, and he insisted that William Armistead be paid for his loss of a slave before he would accept the freedom. And James took on the last name of Lafayette, who became his dear friend. James married, he raised a large family, and he purchased 40 acres next to his former owner, who he considered a good friend. It's just such a cool story. Then in 1824, when Lafayette returned to America for a visit, crowds lined up to see him. Lafayette recognized James Armistead. This was many years later. He stopped, he climbed off his horse, and he hugged James. Lafayette's friendship with James influenced Lafayette to fight to end slavery in France, which had a bigger problem of slavery than America. And James is pictured in that famous painting of the surrender of Yorktown. If you look at it, you will see that James is standing right next to Lafayette. Now, isn't that cool? And I know, our time's probably almost up, but I wanted to mention 3 other Black patriots, actually 4. Two of them are also in America's Famous Spies. And it was a husband and wife team named Dabney and Lucy Walker. And they had both been slaves on a farm in Virginia. They managed to escape by the Underground Railroad, and they crossed into the Union lines near Falmouth, Virginia. Dabney was now a free man, so he volunteered to fight for the Union. He was assigned also to the intelligence unit, which is why he's in the book about famous spies. So there's an amazing story of how this happened, which I can't tell you all of it time-wise. But Lucy, his wife, volunteered to go back into Virginia posing as a slave, risking her freedom to deliver messages to her husband who was across the river. She did this through developing a system of signals using laundry hung on a clothesline. And her husband was on a hill across the river, so he could easily see her clothesline. And I won't tell you the whole story, but different pieces of clothing meant different things. And they were praised for being among the most, quote, promptest and most reliable of General Hooker's spies. And then after the war, they were instrumental in starting the Fifth Avenue Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. So they were dedicated Christians. Yeah, really. The women were instrumental in helping win the war. There's so many stories I could tell you about that too. But then one of our other books, one of the first ones we wrote was Inventors and Scientists, famous inventors and scientists. And there are two African-American, one is an inventor, one's a scientist. And they were born again, Christian, dedicated, wonderful men. Booker T. Washington rose from being a slave to a college president. And he taught other African-American men the benefits of hard work and the importance of reliance on the word of God. He once said, "You never read in history of any great man whose influence has been lasting who has not been a reader of the Bible." He started the Tuskegee Institute to train Black men in the skills that they needed to be productive, contributing citizens. And his Christian influence is just amazing. I mean, he was truly a dedicated Christian man. The same with George Washington Carver, who's also in the Inventors and Scientists. His life is amazing. He was born as a slave, and some slave traders came and stole his mother when he was a baby. They actually stole him too, but I think they dropped him or something. So his owners found him and they raised him like he was one of their own children. He loved nature, and he became a botanist, an artist, a teacher, and a musician. But he overcame so many difficulties to get an education. He ended up working as a teacher at Tuskegee, the school that Booker T. Washington started. And he had what he called God's little workshop, where he depended on God to help him discover things in nature. He discovered 300 uses for the peanut and 100 uses for the sweet potato. And this enabled farmers in the South, who their land was really depleted from raising so much cotton. So he taught them how to use sweet potatoes and peanuts to grow, to make all these other products. So you'll have to get the book to find out all the difficulties that he overcame, but it is just an amazing story. And again, he was dedicated to God. He served God every day of his life after he became a Christian, and he was very verbal in sharing the gospel with others.